All right, guys, welcome to Beer and Boulders 40K. Today we're going to be talking about some tactics in regards to making a drop pod army. Now, drop pods can be the bane of any player that's going against good old Space Marines, whatever chapter that may be, because they're coming down in first turn. You're able to have a lot of mobility, bring down some hard-hitting units, and they don't really have that many perils issues in regards to coming out of reserves. If they land on a troop choice or dangerous and passable terrain, you just reduce the distance from your scatter, and as long as you don't go off the table, they're pretty much in like Flynn. And that's just going to be something that you have to deal with when you're fighting drop pod based armies. Now, I play a lot of drop pods throughout the years. I play Space Wolves, as you guys can see. I have some other armies that have drop pods as well, be it a regular Space Marine. I fancy the Iron Hands. I also have a Dark Angel army as well. I do have an Ultramarine army. I don't play it as much anymore, but it is there. So today we're going to be talking about a little bit about drop pod tactics as a whole. If you want to make a list that's very fluffy in regards to all drop pods all the time, if you want to bring your drop pods in to support your army, or if you're looking on tactics on how to place your drop pods, we're going to talk all about that. Now, before I go any further, let's talk about the rule, the drop pod assault rule. Whatever your total number is, you're going to cut it in half, round up. As you guys can see, I've got 5 pods on the table. That means first turn, 3 have to come in. I do not have the choice. 3 must come in. Then I'll have 2 in reserves, which I roll at the end of turn 2. I'll roll at the beginning of turn 2. And you guys know how the reserves work. I don't need to tell you about that. Now, in regards to tactics, I play a lot of drop pods. Pretty much, I don't know, 5th edition, there's probably a drop pod in every army that I played, every game that I played, probably, 99% of the time. I see a lot of players make the mistake of using drop pods to deliver their kamikaze units, to get in an opponent's rear, blow up some tanks or whatever with melted guns or whatever, and then basically sacrifice that unit. And one thing I could say is that, be a good general. Every once in a while, somebody's got to pull the pin and run into the crowd or jump on the grenade. But those situations are few and far between, and there's other solutions to your tactics that could be more effective, more efficient, and save you some models. So that's just putting that out there, because I see a lot of times it's just, the drop pod is used as a monkey wrench to put in, somebody's backfield at the very beginning, and that's it. I have one rule that I kind of express to all the new players that I play, and it's support your guys, man. Pretend that they are real people, and cover. Make sure they have support. Don't put them out there by themselves, and know your enemy. Don't be throwing 50 points worth of models at a 3,000 point Titan, and before you know it, you're in hand-to-hand combat with whatever you're fighting, a dreadnought, and you don't have anything that can crack that can. Well, you're just throwing your guys away. Now, if they're trying to tie up that unit, there's kind of a sacrifice, getting that guy focusing on them so something else can happen. Well, you got to do that as well, but that's the fun of the game and making those hard decisions. So, using drop pods, a couple key things, especially in the new Maelstrom games, that's important. First off is very good mobility to get troop choices on objectives, to hold those objectives down. Of course, the drop pod itself is also a scoring unit, which can be fun. Again, the high mobility of the drop pod, really got to keep your enemy guessing. There are some solutions out there for things that come in reserves to get a shot at them. But with armor 12 on the drop pods, a little bit harder nut to crack than most people would think. It is an open-topped vehicle, so it does get the +1 when you're rolling the damage table. So keep that in consideration. The point cost is relatively inexpensive. You're talking about 35 points, and for whatever reason, it does become a bullet sponge once it gets in somebody's backfield with that Deathwind missile launch. That big blast marker just hurts people's feelings, and when you pull that out and put it over some of their troops, they really focus on wanting to destroy that. All right, so armor 12 all around. Let's talk about some of the rules. Of course, I think that it would be cool in the game if models could stay in there for a turn, but they can't. They got to come out immediately. It'd also be cool if they can assault out of it, but they can't. They have to jump out immediately. And actually, if you guys remember the original drop pod, which was in the 4th edition Dark Angel Codex, actually had could hold 12 people. And since then that has changed and now is now 10 model capacity. But for a hot second there, it was 12 people, which I thought kind of made sense. But you know, that doesn't matter. 10 will do. 10 will do. And of course, you have your other variants for dreadnoughts, your dreadnought drop pods as well. Those are some big beefy monsters, as you guys can see, and they're pretty fun as well. All right, so first couple rules that I put out there, and there is very few times that these rules aren't appropriate. Rule number 1, never go with a single drop pod. If for whatever reason you have to go with a single drop pod, I hope it has a dreadnought in it, because that unit has to come out the first turn. If you're moving away from your line and you're putting in somebody's backfield, it's probably not going to have any support. And if it can't destroy what its target is on the very first go around, it's probably going to, you know, be shot to crap the next time. So multiple drop pods if you're going to go drop pod use, and I would suggest never having a unit in there unless it be a dreadnought, something that can last a couple turns. So that's rule number 1. Rule number 2, never go even number drop pods. All right, because it doesn't make sense in regards to how it's split. If you're going to go 2 drop pods, you might as well go 3. That way, again, you're not having a single drop pod out by itself. You have 2 coming in on turn 1, and then you have 1 more in reserve, which can be flexible to back up what other unit you want. So that is rule number 2. If you're going to go 1, you might as well go 3. Rule number 3: don't just throw these guys out to the wolves. Use them to deliver your troops on objectives and whatever. Don't just use them for a sacrificial distraction unless absolutely necessary. When you start using that tactic frequently, guys, I see guys just think that's how it's going to be played. And then when I ask them, I'm like, hey, why did you do that? They're like, oh, I don't know. That's just what I always do. So think about that. Number 4, drop pods can change the topography of the map. Okay? They really can be used in a way, especially like a table right now. I can control the firing lanes, control how things are going to move through here by using my drop pods. You know, when you have narrow passageways, you have enemy units with vehicles, or they're trying to move up in your territory, you can plug up some areas, blocking line of sight, blocking fire lanes, blocking lanes for vehicles and transports to get through there very effectively. Really kind of, you know, controlling the flow of traffic on how you want it to do. Now, that doesn't always work out perfectly. Of course, there is some randomization associated with the drop pods. You know, you're rolling your scatter dice in 2d6, but for the most part, you know, you're going to be able to get it to you know, pretty much where you want it to go. The other cool thing is, of course, you get to pick which drop pod you're pulling out in the first turn. You don't have to randomize that either. So that's always a good thing. And then their next rule, I guess to round us up for rule number 5, is keep your drop pods within the 12 inches of the exterior of the board. Just a rule of thumb. Very daring to throw that on the very edge, because that's the only time your drop pod is going to fail, is that when it goes off the board. Any other time, if we scatter onto this building, we're just going to reduce our scatter distance so we can open up our pod. So very, very cool in regards to that. Stick to these inside the 12 inches. One thing I like about these battle mats, it just set up the 12 inches this way. It set up the 24 inches this way with the street. So keep your drop pods inside that 12-inch zone. If you wanted to get back here, you know, maybe luck will guide you back there. But if you throw it inside that 12-inch zone, you do run the risk of running it off. Now, sometimes you got to take that gamble. But just think before you roll those dice. Sometimes you take unnecessary risks with that. So let's talk about this game. If we were to set up this game in a multitude of different ways, let's say we were playing a Maelstrom game, regardless if we have first or second turn, if I'm playing a heavy drop pod list, I actually prefer sometimes to go second, because then I can play off of my opponent better, forcing them to move. One other thing to keep in consideration with the rules is drop pods are considered to be in play during the first turn. So you can theoretically play a 100% drop pod army, everything's coming in drop pods, and not have anything on the table until you go, and that doesn't concede an automatic victory to your opponent for being quote-unquote tabled. I will go to bat and argue with anybody who says anything contradictory to that. Drop pods are considered to be in play even though they're not technically on the table. Unlike, and I think that's the only model device in the game that does that. So let's just, spitball and say we were playing this game right here. So we would have 3 drop pods that would come in on the first turn. What I would usually do is find whatever objective that I wanted to go for, or whatever unit that I wanted to split off for the rest of their forces, and then kind of overwhelm them with the drop pods. So for example, if I had a unit over here that I was trying to fight, these Grey Knights right here, and the unit with the army was spread out, if this was the weakest flank, most of the times I would kind of pull my drop pods in a position where each of these units have some support, but I'm going to wipe that out and then I can slowly make my move through here. Now you also got to play what objectives are available as well, because these can really jump on those objectives pretty quickly. And depending on what type of game you're playing, if you're playing an Apocalypse game where objectives are counted at the end of each turn and not at the end of the turn, or you're playing a Maelstrom game where you're pulling cards, because you generate Maelstrom cards at the start of your first turn, that's actually before you roll your reserves or place down your drop pod, so that way you can actually change your strategy in midstream of where you want to put each item. For example, if we had objective 1 right here, objective 6 right here in this back field, and we didn't have a troop choice in that area for whatever reason, then we might be able to drop a drop pod down so we can get that objective by the end of the first turn, and that would be a good move forward. Just again, and I can't stress enough, make sure these guys are supported. And those last drop pods that are come in slowly in the reserves, again, use those guys to back up your armies that are already in combat or need a little bit backup. Or again, it's always a plus if you can drop them down on a undeclared or uncontrolled objective. So guys, just a couple quick tips and tricks. A lot of people aren't fans of drop pods because they appear to be a little too squishy. Of course, it can concede a kill point relatively easy. They do have 3 hull points, so they're pretty hardy in that retrospect, that they have a 12 armor, a little bit tougher than a Rhino, but of course you get a +1 on that damage table. So that strength 7 weapon, without any AP or anything, can theoretically explode them if you roll a 6, because you get the +1 when they're open tops. So that can be an issue. I do think the Deathwind missile launchers can be a good distraction, dropping that large blast template within 12 inches of the drop pod, and cause a little bit of havoc. You got to be careful though, it doesn't scatter on your own troops. It still has a pretty decent ballistic skill. Looking at this tabletop right here, depending on what kind of game we can play, as you guys can see, we play a little terrain heavy. That's just the way we like to play our games. So we could block some lanes of fire pretty easily and really cut off certain units, surrounding them with drop pods or whatever, and they can just be a nuisance, guys. So pretty cool item. I prefer to use them in my games. They can get a little overdone if you're playing a 9 drop pod army, which I've seen some people do. 5 gets to be a reasonable limit of, if your opponent is not aware of what you're playing, when all of a sudden you show up with 5 drop pods, that can get to be a little excessive. And so I would suggest, preparing whoever you're playing it, what kind of theme army you're going to play. Space Wolves drop pods are unique in the fact right now that they are a fast attack choice, so your allies can be placed in them, and you are still able to throw your Terminators in them, even now that Space Wolves Terminators can teleport. But one thing that is not allowed is, of course, you can't assault out of them, even though they are open topped, and traditionally you could assault out of open topped vehicles, but because they come out of reserves, that reserve rule puts a kibosh on that, even though they're open topped. To probably make them a little too powerful. I know we've played some Planet Strike games which allows you to assault out of reserves, and they're pretty devastating. 10 angry Marines coming out there with bolt pistols and chain swords going off can really ruin your bad day. And if you're able to put some specialty weapons in there, some melted guns or some plasma, even a group of flamers in there, that can be pretty nasty, depending on what kind of opponent you're playing at the time. So guys, just a couple quick tips and tricks. Let me know what you think. Let me know what kind of tactics you like to use in regards to that as well. They're a cool looking model. I actually have a Space Wolf company. I have Ragnar's great company, which is 100% drop pods, with the exception of the bikes that's in the fluff of his army list. So everybody, even the long fangs, come down, drop down in drop pods. Of course, you know, they can't shoot that first turn, but you know, you got to take the good with the bad. And Ragnar is well known for his drop pod assaults. And I thought this was kind of a fluffy list, and it's fun to play. Not that I play it all the time, but if I want to, you know, pull that out, I can. So, all right, guys, that's pretty much it. Thanks for tuning in. Check out the Beer and Boulders 40K podcast. Just remember that is a podcast intended for adults only. Viewer discretion advised. And please subscribe. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.